So I'm going to pass it off now actually to my co-moderator, Ashton, who's just going to lay out some ground rules and some housekeeping items for today's agenda. So Ashton, all you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Before we get to all of our incredible speakers, I just want to make a few announcements. Please be aware that this event is being recorded, so if for any reason you don't want your face included in the video, please make sure to turn your camera off now. Each panel member will have 3 minutes to share. We want to be able to have time for Q&A after both of the panels, so please note that after 3 minutes, we will ask you to wrap up. Questions will be addressed at the end of the program, but you don't need to wait to ask them. Please feel free to use the chat box and send in your questions. If you're press and have questions, please direct them to press inquiries and identify yourself. Also, if you're a public official, please direct your questions to public officials' inquiries and identify yourself. Thank you all again. We hope to stimulate dynamic discussion, and your thoughtful questions will help us do so. That's it for announcements, so let's get into the program. Our first panel will be co-moderated by myself and Alex Ding. My name is Ashton Hazelton, and I'm a staff attorney at BPI Chicago. BPI Chicago is a public interest law and policy center committed to supporting the creation of a just society. Our work today focuses on dismantling systems that oppress, deny, and threaten the Black community and other communities of color. We're honored to work in solidarity with Parole Illinois and address the crisis of incarceration.
Thanks so much, Ashton. My name is Alex Ding. I'm the Chicago organizer of Parole Illinois. Parole Illinois is one of the co-hosts of today's event alongside BPI Chicago, Chicago Votes, Chicago Torture Justice Center, and just a little bit about us. So Parole Illinois is a coalition of people on the inside and outside of prison working for a more just criminal legal system. I want to thank y'all so much for being here today and taking time to hear from our incarcerated organizers, their loved ones, and elected officials on the front lines of the struggle against racist state violence behind bars. I want to provide a roadmap for today's event. So we're having 2 panels for today's discussion. The first is on the crisis of long-term sentencing, and a second panel on moving beyond punishment towards community health and safety. So our first panel will be focused on the crisis of long-term sentencing. In Illinois, our prisons hold over 5,000 people serving long-term sentences. These are sentences that often condemn them to die in prison, which is why many people choose to call them death by incarceration sentences or the other death penalty. And while COVID-19 and the crisis inside US prisons has shone a light on the horrific conditions and overcrowding that have turned many prisons into death traps, it's only a reminder of the fate that thousands of people incarcerated in Illinois who face death by incarceration every year due to decades of extreme and inhumane sentencing policies. Our second panel is focused on moving beyond punishment towards community health and safety. As we speak, millions of people are taking the streets to defend Black life in one of the largest uprisings in US history. And as our incarcerated leaders remind us, our struggles against racist state violence, whether behind bars or in our streets, in prisons or at the hands of our police, are all interconnected. As Mike, one of our board members and dear friends, likes to say, we are only as safe as the most vulnerable among us. Now more than ever, we need to invest in life-giving and life-sustaining institutions and practices. We need to reimagine calls for safety and move beyond criminal punishment towards the healing, repairing, and justice that our communities really need. So that's what's in store for us today. I'm so excited to be having these conversations with such an amazing group of speakers and panelists. And before we just dive right into the program, I want to take a moment to share demands that are coming from our inside organizers for today's event. So the first demand is that we demand that the state take immediate steps to release all vulnerable people and people who are ready to return home from the Illinois Department of Corrections. We demand that the state take immediate steps to institute all IDOC facilities, social distancing yard time, access to the law library, access to personal property, as well as better preparations for the next pandemic. We demand that Illinois prisons shift their focus from warehousing people to preparing people for safe return to their communities. We demand that the overly punitive laws passed in the past 4 decades in Illinois must be repealed, and any new laws must be applied retroactively to people currently incarcerated. IDOC must prioritize programming and preparations for reentry. And finally, we demand fair and inclusive mechanisms to review and release people when they are ready to rejoin society by passing Illinois State Bill 3233, Earned Discretionary Release. With that, I want to kick off our programming and introduce our first speaker, Joseph Dole. Joseph Dole is an award-winning and widely published writer, artist, and activist who is currently incarcerated at Stateville Prison. He has a bachelor's degree from Northeastern Illinois University, and he is the co-founder and policy director of Parole Illinois. We have a recording from Joe that will play shortly. Thanks again so much for being here.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Dole. I am one of the co-founders and currently the policy director of Parole Illinois. Every year, people die in IDOC custody, the vast majority due in part to over-sentencing. COVID-19 is highlighting this fact because it is attacking the elderly and infirm, many of whom have spent decades enduring harsh prison conditions, much of that time unnecessarily. They died lonely deaths for no other reason than incarceration politics and in a vain attempt to satiate the insatiable appetite some people have for revenge. For the past few decades, the state has grudgingly acknowledged that hundreds of innocent people are being wrongfully convicted and imprisoned. It is now time to acknowledge that there are also thousands of guilty people who are wrongfully imprisoned as well, due to the fact that their prison sentences are longer than necessary for public safety. The experts agree mass incarceration's main driver is excessive sentences for serious and violent crimes. Thus, we cannot address mass incarceration without reducing such sentences. The thousands of people currently serving excessively long sentences are doing so due to racism, fear-mongering, dehumanization, political exploitation, and the false promise that harsher sentences are needed to deter crime. Politicians of both parties have used tough-on-crime rhetoric to get elected for decades, telling the public over and over again that even longer and harsher sentences are the only way to deter people from committing crimes. In Illinois, this facilitated the abolishment of parole, the passage of accountability and felony murder laws, truth in sentencing, the Habitual Criminal Act, gun add-ons, life without parole and de facto life sentences, and increased sentencing ranges for nearly every crime imaginable. Unfortunately, this type of punitive deterrence is a myth, as has been shown by nearly every reputable study of deterrence conducted. Craig Finley, the chairman of the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, who has interviewed over 25,000 incarcerated Illinoisans, told a subject matter only hearing on parole that he likewise concluded that long sentences are not a deterrent to crime. Nonetheless, every day men and women are receiving excessively long and inhumane prison sentences under the guise that they will deter people from committing crimes. Let me show you how incarceration politics has affected 3 of my friends' lives. All 3 were sentenced to death by incarceration. My fellow NEIU graduate, Daryl Fair, was coerced at gunpoint into a false confession by one of John Burge's underlings. He was then wrongfully convicted and sentenced to spend 100% of a 50-year sentence in prison thanks to the truth in sentencing law. His liberty was violently stolen by a corrupt legal system, and his release has been continuously denied due to incarceration politics. First, via over-sentencing where he can't be paroled, then when the Torture Inquiry Relief Commission refused to examine non-Burge claims. Then, when the Turk opened up to include non-Burge claims, but was insufficiently funded. Then, when the prosecutor, for months, neglected to divulge the fact that Detective McDermott refused to testify under oath that he didn't assault and threaten Daryl. And now, for several more months, as the court is shut down due to the COVID-19 crisis. Daryl is a 52-year-old asthmatic with a college degree and enormous community support. His innocence should have set him free decades ago. Even if he were guilty, he should not be in prison today, as he has served sufficient time by historical standards and poses no threat to society. Will society collectively shrug if he too contracts COVID-19 and dies, like society has shrugged off the thousands of other deaths over the past few decades in the IDOC due to oversentencing and incarceration politics? Would society care more if people learned that his wrongful conviction will cost taxpayers millions of dollars and his wrongful death would add to that tab? How many additional men and women could have already been safely at home with their families if politicians hadn't played incarceration politics with the young adult parole bill over the last few years? Political calculations alone kept it from being retroactive, inclusive, and extending to those who were under 25 when the crime occurred. I know at least two of my friends who might still be alive today if it had been retroactive, etc. James Scott and Joseph Wilson. James was 18 when he committed the crime he was incarcerated for. He was a kind old man who had spent decades in prison and simply wanted to get out and reunite with his family. Joseph was a writer, artist, and entrepreneur who had also served decades in prison and simply wanted to regain his freedom so that he could give back to his community. Both are now dead. While COVID-19 may have prevented them from taking another breath, it was incarceration politics that put the bag over their heads. They will be sorely missed. If Illinois had not abolished parole, etc., all three of my friends would likely have returned home to their families a decade or more ago. They would have undoubtedly become upstanding and contributing members of their communities. I can say that because I know their character, not just the false labels society placed on them. Instead of being home, however, the state has spent millions of dollars to continue to incarcerate them, two of them unto death. These are just a few examples of the thousands of people who deserve a chance to return home, but who are being forced to grow old and die in prison unnecessarily. We are tired of watching our friends die in here for no other reason than to benefit the political careers of yesterday's politicians. Many have noted that the COVID-19 situation in prisons is a moral test that our society is failing abysmally. However, it is simply shining a spotlight on an even more abysmal moral failure, that of mass incarceration and incarceration politics in general. I often wonder, if mass incarceration truly is the civil rights issue of our era, then how will our grandchildren view not only the architects and champions of mass incarceration, but also those in power today who fail to act swiftly and rectify it, and simply either choose to do nothing or choose to delay doing something while people continue to die, all while politicians continue making political calculations. I thank you all for your time today, and especially thank those senators and representatives who are present and understand the dire immediacy of the situation.
We are so grateful to be able to have these words from inside and the reminder from Joe that we can no longer shrug off these issues. I'd like to now introduce our next panelist, Howard Keller. Howard Keller is a graduate, student, and advocate, and coronavirus survivor.
We're hearing like really heartbreaking, difficult news. And so someone asked like, yo, how has it been like mourning, your friends and stuff like that while incarcerated? And I mourning, like really? We don't get a chance to mourn in here. You know what I mean? I'm constantly being bombarded every day with new news, right? So I hear like a friend of mine, a classmate of mine died. Rusty. You know what I mean? Ronald Rice. I was just in class with him, worshiping with him on Bible study on Fridays. When I hear news of him passing away, it's like, oh man, that's devastating, right? And then just as I'm trying to cope and trying to, formulate how to process that information, right? They come snatch out like 5 or 6 of the people that's supposed to surround me and tell them, hey, y'all got to go into quarantine. Y'all tested positive for COVID-19. It's something really deeply problematic with having to endure just this onslaught of bad news, traumatizing news, right? Alone in the prison cell, dealing with like the most frightening, mysterious circumstances of possibly of my entire life, right? And I mean, I don't have anyone. I don't even have anyone like to lean on, right? I can't even really like cry. I think like the people who have the power to undo these things and struggle with pen need to really realize where their power lies. This ain't the time to be playing politics. You know what I mean? They want to play politics and think about their constituency. Your constituency's loved ones are in prison. I mean, if you don't want to recognize us as part of your constituency, right? Just understand that the people who you serve in the state of Illinois, loved ones, their brothers, their sisters, their fathers, right? They are falling ill inside of a prison, right, where none of the guidelines that have been issued by the CDC are capable of being enforced. Every lawmaker can look at the sentencing scheme right now and clearly see, right, that you have people who have been over. They created a mandatory natural life sentence based off of an individual, which is John Wayne Gacy. That was the justification to do away with parole and to create life without the possibility of parole in the state of Illinois. Yet that sentence has been applied to 18, 19-year-old children who never even harmed or killed anyone simply because they were riding in the car. And so every lawmaker can look and see how these policies that were created throughout the 80s and the 1990s have disproportionately affected the lives of so many people in a way that's been completely unfair. And they've had opportunities to correct that, right, through awareness ways of raising effort, the real life testimonies of the individuals, and they've done nothing. And so now we have this situation where you got guys who had term of years sentences. Their sentences have become death sentences now, or individuals who were wrongfully convicted and trying to get their day in court. Their wrongful convictions now have become wrongful deaths. You know what I mean? Because they're no longer here. And the living units, right, these cell houses that we live in right now are now condemned units, right? Everyone's sitting here with this like shroud of uncertainty, not knowing whether or not any sneeze or cough or the slightest is going to be the thing that causes me to have this really deadly disease, right? So all of this could have easily have been avoided, right, if the lawmakers had really taken their jobs just that much more serious, right? At the end of the day, right, I've reached a level of rehabilitation that's acceptable to society 10 years ago. You know what I mean? And there's hundreds of people that can attest to that. And I'm about to cut off. I love you.
I love you too. We're so grateful to be able to hear from Howard and uplift his message that our incarcerated loved ones are just as part of our communities as everyone outside, and that they deserve our protection and care. Next up, I have the great pleasure of introducing Senator Celina Villanueva. Senator Celina Villanueva was born in Chicago and raised in Little Village. She is a full-time state legislator. I'm going to turn it over to you, Senator Villanueva.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. What Howard and Joe were talking about are serious issues that unfortunately it always hurts a little when they talk about lawmakers and legislators not doing their jobs, because the truth of the matter is, for a very long time, we've had people in power in different capacities who have allowed the perpetuation of racism to permeate throughout the lawmaking process. We've seen it in history through Jim Crow, because Jim Crow laws were actual laws. And we've seen it through, you know, the racism on sentencing guidelines, a lot because of the 80s and the 90s, and a lot of it, unfortunately, coming from so many different levels of government that affect the everyday lives of people. One of the things that, from the moment of entering into, you know, political office and into legislative office, for me has always been, how do I bring who I am to the table to be a better lawmaker, to be a better legislator, but to also better craft policy. And with my background in organizing, it's never been something of just me. It's always been a collective we. So for me, the best laws have always been, and the best policy has always been policy that's drafted by a collective of people. So when I got approached from, you know, by the folks at Chicago Votes and Parole Illinois about carrying, you know, a bill as monumental as, you know, actually bringing back parole in the state of Illinois, I said, yeah, let's do it. Part of that is because I am a woman of color, a daughter of immigrants in this country. And when we talk about mass incarceration, we think about, you know, jails and prisons, but we also have to talk about, obviously, the huge problems that we have in terms of our immigration system. And understanding that all of these situations ultimately really have a fundamental core, which is racism and white supremacy. In the understanding that it's bodies that, you know, communities that have been probably hardest hit by poverty and by legislation that, again, has meant to perpetuate poverty and perpetuate, you know, the vicious cycles that keep people incarcerated for generations upon generations. The lack of understanding that mental health and trauma plays a huge impact on what happens in people's lives, so much so that it impacts our DNA. And so, you know, I'm also a family member of several different family members who have been incarcerated. And so it's one of these things that when I bring, you know, myself into the work, it's because I really do, because I'm someone who comes from a low income, you know, immigrant family that has experiences and that wants to see the legislator, the state legislator, and all forms of government actually do better and be better and stand by what we say and not just make it about politics. So it's really important for me to make sure that we're uplifting the stories of Howard and Joe, but all the other folks who are incarcerated, the men and the women who find themselves in a part of this huge, complex situation that we need more people to join into the fight, not just from the outside and not just family members, but legislators, to understand that it is political, but political in the sense that these are people's lives. And, you know, I'm probably going over my time a little bit, but I really wanted to share this because this is something that's been happening this week. I represent and I live in the Little Village community of Chicago. And for the past 72 hours, tensions have been very high between Black and Brown communities because of an effect of the George Floyd and the various murders by the hands of law enforcement. And literally, we've been working, elected officials, you know, folks in the community, the violence interrupters, the peacekeepers, many of who have also gone through, you know, the system, who literally work the miracles to squash a lot of the tensions, working with both Black and Brown communities in the streets for hours and hours and days on end this entire week to literally talk to folks and intervene. And so it's something that I see, it's something that folks, you know, whether or not they know the after effects of everything, but the fact that that's even able to happen is both a recognition that this is important, that we have people that are more than ready to come out and be quote unquote, you know, contributing members of society, but also people that we need to help with us, to help intervene with what's going on, Because the truth of the matter, this is all a vicious cycle that's tied together and that we need to make a change and make a difference. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Senator Villanueva. We are so grateful that you're not only here with us today and willing to share some of yourself, but that you're here with us for the long haul and with SB 3233. So thank you so much. Our next speaker today is Eric Blackmon. Eric Blackmon is a determined advocate for justice due to spending nearly 2 decades imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. Eric, we're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you all for having me. I'd like to just thank you all for being here, having me more so than anything, and being here just to lend the ear. In the time I'm allowed it, I would like to focus on what has led us to this point. I'm not sure how most people would define it, whether they would call it mass incarceration, long-term sentencing, or death by incarceration. But I believe that they all point to a need for systematic change within the quote-unquote criminal justice system. It's undisputed that what has led us to this point are the draconian laws set in place decades ago, most notably the truth in sentencing and firearm enhancement laws that have enthralled thousands of young Black and brown men in prisons with sentences that are impossible to serve and complete. It's a shame that these prisoners with life and de facto life sentences account for roughly 12% of the prison population, yet they account for more than half of the sentences imposed, meaning that a large number of these people are slated to die in prison, costing taxpayers more than $15 billion additional dollars along the way. We cannot continue this way. We must demand change. No, we demand change. We are here now letting the legislators know that we will no longer tolerate the way things have been going for so long. We demand that mechanisms be put in place to alleviate long-term sentencing. We demand that an adequate and just parole system be put in place to allow the release of those that are worthy and have earned retribution and a second chance. We demand that truth in sentencing and firearm enhancement laws be repealed because they are racially biased and put an undue burden on our communities and families. We demand these things and hope that justice may finally become just. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing, and thank you for all you do in our community to uplift voices and fight for justice. Next, I want to introduce Marilyn Malero. Marilyn Malero was released from prison in April 2020 after serving 27 long years. Marilyn, can you hear us?
I hear you. Hi. Hi, my name is Marilyn. I was incarcerated for 27 years. In 1993, I was sentenced to death row. I was there until 1996 when I was resentenced to natural life without the possibility of parole. In 2013, Dwight Correctional Center closed and we were all detained, were transferred to Logan Correctional Center. At Logan, the level of disrespect was beyond anything I have ever encountered. We are called every profanity word that could have thought of. The racism was at an all-time high. Logan does not provide educational or vocational classes to women that are serving 10 years or more. The ladies that are serving long sentences are mainly the ones forgotten in the system. There is not much that a long-timer can do while incarcerated unless they can find a mentor to help pay for their education fees. I was blessed to have spiritual mentors, families, and friends that helped pay for several correspondence courses. Not everyone is as fortunate to receive the help needed. Most long-timers no longer have living relatives to help support them with an income. I refuse to let the system get away with anything I felt was inappropriate. Many long-timers spoke with the wardens to create monthly meetings to help better the quality of life within our community. I was also a committee member of the Phoenix Rising, a group that was designed for women who had 7 years to life to help with daily support and cope with prison life. The healthcare at Logan is very poor. If I had to rate it from 1 through 10, the most they would receive is a 1. On February 8th, 2019, I had major surgery. I returned to Logan with 54 stitches on my stomach. After 2 days of requesting that my medication be delivered to the housing unit, I was sent to healthcare and placed in a strip cell with a concrete slab with no handles for me to brace myself. So I slept in a chair until the next morning. On another occasion, I had a chronic cough for 3 weeks. I signed up for sick call and had to wait for about a month before I was called to healthcare. I sat there for 9 hours to be told I was not being seen. We have written many aldermen, senators, congressmen, and legislators. A majority of the time, no one will respond to our letters. I am 100% in support of bringing the parole board back. There are many women who have served over 20 years to 30 plus years in prison. Women who have rehabilitated themselves. It is time to say enough is enough. I will do what I can to advocate on future changes with these unjust laws. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Marilyn, thank you so much for sharing that powerful story and giving us a glimpse of what we're not able to see.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're going to hear from Lewis C. Henry. Lewis C. Henry is a Chicago native who served 26 years in prison for a drug conviction. He was granted clemency in April 2020 by Governor Pritzker. Lewis, we're so happy to have you here today. Welcome back to the community. One second, Lewis, we have to unmute you.
Okay, there we go.
We can hear you now.
All right. Again, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, as everyone can imagine. Yes, it is true. I served 26 years on a sentence of 88 years for possession with intent to deliver cocaine and marijuana. I was sentenced under the extended term. My extended term sentence was based purely on previously possessing $10 worth of cocaine. My current conviction consisted of over 400 grams. For those that are really not familiar with weights and measures, that is not a hell of a lot. However, it exposed me to a sentence of up to 100 years. Now, the maximum sentence would have been 50 years, which I was sentenced to. And because I had a previous conviction for possessing $10 worth of cocaine, that allowed my judge to extend my sentence up to an additional 30 years. So what I would like to expound on is the ridiculous monetary expenditure that our legislators are doling out each year for people like me. And I am not unique in this situation. I am not unique. It's said that it costs between $35,000 and $38,000 a year to incarcerate one person. Well, with that being said, I find it extremely ridiculous that you would expend $35,000 to $38,000 a year for $10 worth of cocaine. So these are the laws that we need to focus on, that need to be repealed because they're being abused. There was no logical reason to sentence me an extra 30 years on top of 50 years. Most people convicted for murder do not receive up to 88 years for nonviolent crimes. However, in Illinois, this is a common practice and a dirty little secret. Because crimes like mine go unnoticed and unreported, then you have what's called a forgotten population of people, including those that are serving time on habitual criminal act, and such as habitual criminal act. That means after your third class act conviction, then you are sentenced up to natural life. However, you can be in prison 30 or 40 years and be a model prisoner, yet no consideration is given to your rehabilitation, your intellectual growth, your maturation. Nothing matters other than the fact that you committed a crime 30 or 40 years ago that did not necessarily have to involve an act of violence. This is unfair. This is what must be changed. We must hold our legislators responsible and accountable for all of these draconian sentencing guidelines that serve no purpose whatsoever other than to incarcerate you for exorbitant amounts of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis, for sharing those powerful remarks. I want to introduce next Alan Mills. Alan is the Executive Director of the Uptown's People Law Center, a nonprofit community legal clinic located on the north side of Chicago.
Good afternoon. So I want to step back a minute and talk about the prison system as a whole. Illinois is, by many measures, among the worst in the country. Our prisons are extraordinarily old. Our maximum security prisons, the newest one is Stateville, which was finished in the 1920s. Menard and Pontiac are even older. In terms of medical care, we are among the most, the worst, again, the worst in the country. We do not spend nearly enough money on medical care. For a while, we were down to number 49 of the 50 states and how much money per prisoner we spend on medical care. We're now up somewhere around 40. In terms of the number of medical care providers we still have among the very lowest, like I think number 48, ratios of medical staff to prisoners. So what Marilyn was saying in terms of the impossibility of getting help at Logan is true in every prison in the state of Illinois. This is not a new problem. This has been decades in the making. For decades, we have over-incarcerated and underfunded our prison system so that the buildings are falling apart and there's not enough staff. But the other way to look at that is we simply have too many prisoners. And I think that's the better way to look at it. We have, as several people have said, instituted the slow motion death penalty. Illinois, in theory, has eliminated the death penalty, but we provide such bad medical care and keep people inside so long that, in fact, as Joe started us off saying, thousands have died unnecessarily. We filed a lawsuit about the medical care in the state of Illinois almost a decade ago. A year ago, it settled. The medical care was so bad that they thought it would take them 10 years to bring it into compliance with the minimum standards of the Constitution. Well, COVID didn't give us 10 years. It gave us less than a year. And we now have a true crisis in the prison system. The best evidence of this, the fact that they had to bring in the National Guard to provide medical care because the staff simply was unable to do it. They brought in the National Guard to Stateville. They brought in the National Guard to Sheridan. They brought in the National Guard to Hill Correctional Center. In each of those facilities, they had to set up tents because there wasn't enough bed space for people, the number of people that were sick. We now have COVID-19 in 20 of the 40 institutions that we have in this state. A total of 223 prisoners have been confirmed diagnosed, but the number is almost certainly higher because outside of Stateville, we haven't tested but 200 to 300 prisoners in the entire state. So we really don't have any idea how many people have been infected. There's that TV advertisement for Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, I think it's important that we all note what happens in prison doesn't stay in prison. In Stateville, we saw this very dramatically. We saw that when the first people got tested immediately, 7 people had to be taken out to the emergency room in a nearby hospital. All of them were put on ventilators. It overwhelmed the emergency room. There was 0 spaces left for anybody from the community because every single person was being treated from Stateville. And Stateville, in a sense, is the best place for this to happen. Joliet's a big city. It's near Chicago. It has lots of medical resources. Think about Menard Correctional Center down on the Mississippi River, located in Randolph County. It's a prison that holds 3,000 people, almost twice as big as Stateville. There are a total of 2 ICU beds in the entire county. Should COVID-19 hit Menard Correctional Center, the healthcare system in the entire southern tier of the state of Illinois would collapse. So if you think that this is just a prison problem, you are wrong. This is a public health problem which we all have to look at. And that's the way we have to look at mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is not just affecting prisoners, it's affected every community in the state. We are now locking up so many people that we've destroyed the ties in the community that are what actually keep people safe. Strong communities with strong family ties, strong social ties, strong community institutions where people can relate to each other. Representative was talking earlier about how they went out on the street in order to rebuild those ties in the last couple of nights. That's a project that should have been going on for the last 20 years. How much safer would those streets have been had we invested in schools, parks, after-school programs, instead of ripping people out of those communities and sending them to prison? A huge proportion of young black men and young brown men in the city from particular blocks are in prison. Other countries don't do this. It's not the only way to run a system. Norway, for example, which everybody's heard about, but you have to understand what's fundamentally different about Norway is that they don't believe that coercion is the best way to enforce social norms. They believe that strong community ties are what keeps us all safe. And therefore, when people break the rules, what happens is they say, well, the community must have broken down somehow. Well, how did these people become disconnected? So prisons there are not a way to rip people out of the community. They're meant to reconnect people to communities. So you may have a prison with only 300 beds, and that would be a big prison in Norway. Not 3,000 like Menard, but 300. They wouldn't be located 600 miles away. They'd be located next door. People wouldn't be locked in behind bars. They live in essentially dorm rooms communally so that they have to take care of each other. They cook for themselves. They clean for themselves. They're not locked in cages all day long. And they go home on the weekends and they have jobs, not jobs sweeping the floor outside of their cell, jobs in the community. And they have very short sentences. A murderer typically gets 5 years at Norway. And those are long sentences. Why? Because the whole point of prison is to get you reconnected to the community. And it does not reconnect anybody to send them 600 miles away and lock them up for 20 years and then let them go and say, okay, you're on your own, figure out how to connect to the community. We need to rebuild our community. We need to take the money that we are currently spending on punitive measures and invest it in community ties to keep us all safer. We have a prison system right now which is 7 times what it was in the 1970s. We are not safer. All we have done is destroyed communities. We have not made each other safer. Thank you.
Alan, thank you so much for those sobering statistics and suggested solutions. I'd like us all to just take 30 seconds to let that truly soak in. We're gonna give you guys an opportunity to review our demands, and we will be back in just about 30 seconds with our second panel. Thanks to all of you who spoke on the first panel. We'll be back with you in just a few seconds.
See, before I draw the line, let me welcome you close to all the folks who knew Obama sold the people a hoax. Gave the money to suckers while our community still poor. Withdrew the troops, but started another war. Colonizing, terrorizing, creating the oil crisis so they can make a killing on food and gas prices. Prisons is filling, they trying to lock up the future. Militarize borders and control of computers. Want a stupid bumping music that ain't healthy for the shortest. Privatizing schools and policemen in the hallways. Can't be dormant, I'm awoke and rise up, be ready. Brought the family with us and we hold the machetes.
Riding the fence, riding the fence. Too many people be riding the fence. Yeah, you say you ready for war, but are you convinced? I'm not convinced. If you're a rider, freedom fighter, crowd excited, then let's do this. We can make one big united, middle finger to the U.S. Give me the bravest and the truest. Fuck the hippest and the coolest. We gon' spark this revolution and cross this off our to-do list. Put your foot down if you look down on this criminal system. Put your foot down and get shook down like my niggas in prison. Don't be
You receive 50 to 80 years.
Right.
For, you on mute, right?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back with us. If you want to just take a moment, we've heard some really powerful stuff from all of the previous speakers and want to let it process in our bodies. There's only so much information we can take in. So as you're moving, if you want to just move your body in whatever way feels right, just get your hippocampus kind of moving. You can clap your hand, move some papers around, but just allowing the information to get in, to settle in is great. And being nice to our bodies is something we can actually do during these moments. So we're going to be moving into the second panel, moving beyond punishment towards community health. My name is Cindy Eigler. I'm one of the co-executive directors of the Chicago Torture Justice Center. For those who don't know the Chicago Torture Justice Center, we were founded out of a vision for holistic reparations that were fought for and won in Chicago in 2015. The center is the first and only center in the United States addressing the impact of domestic torture and police violence. And we are actively working to create a world that has no place for policing or prisons, understanding that the impacts of racialized state violence and institutional racism are traumatizing, and that this trauma directly interrupts our abilities to dream the world we want for ourselves while disconnecting us from our knowing, our community, and our gifts. Through the center's unique politicized healing framework, we work to heal from the many ways that state violence and the many systems of oppression have harmed us and our folks, to name and dismantle these institutions, policy structures, and to create new systems and practices of accountability and support. And I'm really happy to be with you all today and be part of this discussion. And I'm gonna introduce my co-moderator, Suzanne. Pass it on to you.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you again to all of you for being here today. My name is Suzanne Nasser, and along with my comrades Nadine Neber and Janae Strong, we are co-founders of the organization MAMAs, which stands for Mamas Activating Movements for Abolition and Solidarity. And we are happy to be in community with all of you today and to be co-sponsoring this event with Parole Illinois, Chicago Torture Justice Center, Chicago Votes, BPI, and all of our other partners. Just a little bit about Mamas. We are a collective that works with people who are mothering and caretaking prisoners, who are resisting immigration bans, resistors and survivors of war and colonization. And our focus really is on uplifting the movement possibility of mother survivors of these systems. Like most everyone here on this platform, we operate under the premise that prisons have a devastating ripple effect on families, communities, and neighborhoods. We believe prison abolition must take seriously the way prisons impact people of color and colonized people and our communities at large across the globe, from the US to Palestine and far beyond, devastating our economic realities, our physical and mental health, and our ability to survive and thrive with dignity. With that said, this particular discussion, moving beyond punishment and toward community health, will continue with the focus of ending death by incarceration, and will also illuminate the mechanisms of building safe and vibrant communities. I'd now like to welcome our first speaker, Mike Simmons. Mike Simmons is a board member of Parole Illinois, and he is currently working on his master's degree at North Park University in their restorative arts program. Mike?
We're hearing like...
Yes.
Mike Simmons here from Parole, Illinois. Over the past several years, many people now have heard me share my story of how, at a most difficult time in her life, the mother of the man whose life was lost in my case nearly 2 decades ago, shared how she hoped that I would see the error of my way and decide to make my life count for something. Although it hasn't gotten any easier, I continue to share my story. And one of the reasons I do so is because of the broader issues of generational trauma and cycles of violence that it speaks to. Having lost my own dad to gun violence as a kid, the grace that I've received, as well as results from studies done by the Alliance for Justice and Safety regarding crime victims, have given me hope in the unlimited possibilities of reconciliation and restoration. And so I'm encouraged by a more wholesome conversation surrounding victimization and trauma. A conversation a narrative that for far too long has been severely limited in our criminal legal process. While I strive daily to honor the words of a particular mother in my case and the memory of her son, my story is not unique. There are many men and women in prison in Illinois who work tirelessly toward rehabilitation, yet who continue to be warehoused for no reason other than outdated laws. And we've seen the results of these laws. Now that we have this pandemic among us, one of the many, many things that COVID is highlighting is how years of failed policy has not only trampled the value of rehabilitation, but they've also helped to create a public health monster that cannot be contained by a wall. Our communities deserve better. It takes smart policies that take into account the interconnectivity of people on both sides of the wall, and that also recognizes, as Jamie Worker of the Economic Policy Institute stated just last week, that we're only as safe as people most vulnerable among us. Thank you all for your time. Take care.
Thank you for Mike to be able to share those really powerful words. I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Senator Robert Peters. Senator Peters is a Democratic member of the Illinois Senate for the 13th District, and I'll pass it over to you, Senator.
Thank you. To me, I think that for the last 30 to 40 years, we've been having this horrendous conversation about what it means to have safety and justice and dignity and health in our communities. I think back to, not only Nixon and Ronald Reagan, but Clinton, and the idea that safety and justice is to lock up folks and disinvest in communities. It's not to lift anybody up. And so I always think back to the fact that in my role as state senator, I visited 16 schools. And in each and every one of the schools I visited, they would have 4, 5, 6 police officers or security, but no nurse and no social worker. And I think about someone's life when you close a grocery store, you can't drink the water, you can't get the job that you need. And I think about the fact that when you're young and the trauma and the pain that you go through, and the first person that you meet inside of a school is a police officer. And so when I think about moving away from incarceration, I think about it in the tangible sense that when you are someone in pain and trauma, when you're someone in need, that a police officer can't replace a social service or a social good. And so I think of my role and, and how I'm supposed to play in challenging this, and that is to tear down these structures that have come from austerity and racism and patriarchy that have disinvested in our communities, and to reimagine safety and justice in this time. And when I think about a safe community, I think of Kenilworth or parts of Evanston. And I think about what you get at New Trier when it comes to a school. And I think people know what safety is. And when they close their eyes, they know what that comfort is. It is not the police. It's not incarceration. It is absolutely, to be very honest with you, this week has been a bit frustrating and difficult. The district has downtown, South Shore, and the Southeast side. And downtown is essentially like a green zone. It's locked out. Nobody else can really get into it. South Shore had a lot of looting, and the reaction to that has been absolutely disappointing. And same with the Southeast side, where there's no pharmacy. And it's made me think a lot about this, because often the narrative is looting's this problem, everyone should be mad. And nobody talks about the fact that these are areas where schools were closed, areas where there weren't a grocery store for almost a decade, where we give tax breaks to large corporations to pay people shit, excuse my language. And I'm like, what kind of conversation we having about looting and safety? And we keep going back to it. I get very upset at the media. And I think about the fact that we have to go back to what this story is about what's going on in our communities. And if we want to have safety, it's not going to be falling into this bullshit trap. It's going to require us to dig deep at the root causes when it comes to capital and people. And you know, personally, and I know for many folks out here, it's been hard. And you know, someone asked me what can we do, and I was like, everything. And trying to figure that out. But I think we know what it means to have this real sense of safety. And it's time for us in this moment to demand that we defund police and the incarceration machine. And when these large corporations use looting to close a Walgreens in our community, that if the private sector won't do it, then the public sector will. And so I just want to say thank you all for having me on. I know this isn't the most coherent thing. I've been having a lot of conversations with people, and I think I don't share the same politics as a lot of my colleagues, and it's been particularly tense conversations about where do we go from here. But I you know, to everyone who's in Stateville, everyone on here, just thank you for having me and holding this space. And I think if we can organize in this moment and we can build, we can actually win the world that we deserve and get the dignity that we deserve. So thank you all. And I'm only as powerful as the people who are with me, and we're all in this together. And I have to translate this organized power down in Springfield, and I'll do whatever I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters, and we stand behind you and with you, and we actually appreciate the fact that you don't share the same politics as your colleagues, and we need more folks that are principled and have you know, your sense of politics. So thank you for all that you are doing and for championing Senate Bill 3233 along with Senator Villanueva. I'd like to next introduce Bella Baz. Bella is an architect of community construction at the Decarceration Collective, an anti-carceral law firm. Thank you, Bella, for being with us.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a poem. Can folks hear me? All right. What if staying home ain't safe either? You're locked in a crib with a man who beat you, or a mama who off the needle. You need her, she can't even feed you. Or a brother who fighting demons. Used to touch you only on weekends. Now he laid off and just laid up in your blankets covered in semen. Make social distance sound decent. Your last suicide attempt was too recent. Ain't no mental health in your precinct. Preteens on the street sleeping. Her job was welcome now. So what you know about shelter in place at a dope house or the jailhouse? For my niggas, that's a different type of lockdown. Need a different type of bailout. Have you ever felt hellbound? Ever questioned the love of the people who you be around? Even solid niggas have meltdowns. Heavy as the hair with the crown. They say I'm the voice of my town. Say I'm the leader that we need right now. Say what I say always sound profound. All I'm saying is my prayers out loud. May we be blessed with the strength to resist any weapon formed against. May we all prosper and nurture the next generation of nurses and doctors. May we build a better world for our sons and daughters with our own farms and gardens. May our hearts soften and our light cancel out the darkness. Ashe. So I wanted to start with that piece because I want us to all keep in mind that before all these protests broke out, before civil war really broke out across this country, People have been forced to stay at home, ordered to stay at home during a pandemic for 10 weeks. And under all elected officials keep telling us, be safe, be a hero, stay at home, without thinking about what is going on in our homes, what is going on in our communities. All right, we have a lot going on here. It's a lot of mental health issues. It's a lot of trauma. It's a lot of kids who've lost their friends to gunshots, to shootings, who've been victims of gunshot wounds themselves. Like, and there's no resources here for us. All right, like so to then see the whole country be devastated by a pandemic, to imagine what that does for communities that were already devastated, that were already suffering the highest rates of unemployment in the nation. All right, so I just want to uplift that it's still a lot going on in people's homes. Like, it's still a lot going on right now in people's homes, and we need to be directing resources. Like Mayor Lori Lightfoot just said that she's going to implement police reform within 90 days, and a part of that reform was counseling for police officers. Then nobody asked for that. We want mental health clinics in our neighborhoods. We want recovery rehabilitation centers in our neighborhoods for us that are fully funded, right? We have people right now, mothers, sisters, fathers who suffer from addiction, alcoholism, all type of shit. And we cannot make anyone go to rehab. We cannot make anyone stay there, right? So even if you know a person is a danger to you, to your family, to themselves, you don't have any power. Like the police have to do that. The courts have to do that. And half the time, even if they send somebody to prison for an offense of around alcoholism, around drug use, they're not sending them, they're not mandating that they get help. They're not mandating rehabilitation. All right, so it's things like that that we can really organize around. We can really like push legislation. Like there's no way it has to be a court to say that your family has to go to rehab. If you know that they need that, and then that they're in danger, and then the next thing is that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else, and then the police get involved, and we could, look, we got a lot of work to do on community health in our neighborhoods. All right, and that's really I think all people wanted me here to talk about, all right, because I'm a voice for the young people, all the stuff that's going on. People keep talking about people stealing for George Floyd, people looting for George Floyd. No, they're not. They are taking things because they do not have things. They are taking things because they need them, period. It ain't got nothing to do with George Floyd. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that they do not have anything. That's my piece. That's my time. Again, I'm Bella Boz, y'all. Boz is BAHHS, Black Ancestors Here, Healing Society. If you got kids who are on social media, tell them to follow me. So we can uplift the vibrations, and we can lead them in the right path, so that we can politicize what's happening right now in a way that they can get it right. All right.
Thank you so much, Bella, for always bringing your truth, your art, your heart, your wisdom. I so appreciate you. And now we're going to move to the next panelist is Melissa Villa. Melissa Villa is the sister of Alexander Villa, who's being detained at Cook County Jail Division 10 right this week, and we're really thankful, Melissa, that you could join us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to just kind of talk about my brother's incarceration at the Cook County Jail. My brother's name is Alexander Villa, and he's been incarcerated at the county jail for about 7 years now. During those 7 years, he was awaiting trial, and as a result, he was wrongfully convicted last year of a crime that he did not commit. Our experience has been painful, it's been emotional, it's been hard. I feel that the law enforcement, they failed to protect us, and they continue failing us. And as a result, my brother is in the situation that he's in. He hasn't been sentenced just yet because we filed for a motion for new trial due to prosecutorial misconduct. and ineffective counsel, I'm sorry. So that is the only reason why he is still incarcerated at the county jail. Moreover, during COVID-19, my brother suffered from chills and fever for 3 days. Before being taken to the CERMAC unit or the CERMAC hospital, he had been, let me start over. He had been suffering from chills and fever for 3 days before being taken to CERMAC for isolation for 28 days. And he was tested for COVID 4 times, which thank God came back negative. In addition to the COVID testing, he did have a CT scan done, which showed a rare case of COVID. He was tested, or the test came back negative, but he had COVID-like lungs. So further testing was done, and as a result, he has a rare case of a crystal-like condition in his lungs, which would put him more vulnerable for COVID. So it is an underlying health issue. As we all know, before COVID, Cook County Jail is known to be extremely dirty. It's a dirty place. The moment you open the faucets, you have brown water that just comes through those faucets. The jail cells are infested with rats and roaches. And when COVID started, the Cook County sheriffs were not giving these detainees any proper PPE. So they didn't have any hand sanitizer, any soap, any mask, anything whatsoever. In September of 2019, an Illinois Department of Labor representative tested the air quality level and found 2 hazardous substances present in his test findings in the air insulation at the county jail. There needs to be a change, and as soon as possible. I'm hoping that the legislators can create an independent prosecutorial misconduct accountability board to investigate and hold prosecutors accountable. Because it starts with law enforcement and essentially goes up to prosecutors, in which they hold a tremendous amount of power in our system. And this needs to stop. It needs to stop as soon as possible. And I encourage everyone to just come together. We're powerful in numbers. Get involved with your community, get involved with your advocacy groups, get involved with your legislators, and we need change. We need change as soon as possible. We do. So thank you for allowing me to speak on his behalf.
Thank you, Melissa, for calling on your courage and for all of your strength. And I want you to know that you are not alone, and we stand with you, and we stand with your brother, Alex, and all who have been wrongfully convicted and tortured. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce James Kilgor. James Kilgor is a formerly incarcerated activist and writer based in Urbana.
Thank you. Before I speak, I want to put out a gesture of solidarity to Melissa Villa and Alex Villa. I'd like everyone to chant, "Free Alex Villa."
Free Alex Villa.
Free Alex Villa.
Free Alex Villa.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm here to speak about some of the initiatives that the authorities have used to contribute to public health under this COVID, the COVID regime. So what the authorities have been doing when they're releasing people, they're putting them on electronic monitors. And we know that in Cook County Jail, they actually ran out of electronic monitors, and they were refusing to let people out until they got more monitors in stock. Now, we know that the longer people stay in jail, the more likely they are to contract the virus. But we also need to recognize that if you put people on house arrest with an electronic monitor, it's another form of draconian sentencing. It's really another way to replicate that life sentence, because you're putting people in a position where they lack freedom, where they have to get permission to leave their house to even go and get medical assistance. And if they violate that rule of getting permission to leave the house, they can be sent back to jail or back to prison. The Department of Corrections has done a similar thing. They have, instead of having normal visits from parole agents, they've asked everybody to add BI Smart Link to their phone, download a surveillance app, which is supposed to be just for video visitation between them and their parole agents, but these are devices that can gather a lot of data and add to the surveillance that's done to people who are under parole supervision. So I have to ask a question. Why is it that they can find money for these electronic devices, that they can find money to put people on an ankle shackle and confine them to their house? As Bella Boss has said, there's things going on in those houses. And if you are on house arrest, you can't leave whatever challenges you're facing in that house. Why is it that they can find money for this? Why can they find money for smartphone apps, which are eventually going to become spyware in people's phones, but they can't find money for medical services to create public health services in the communities, mental health services, which is what people need. So I want people to really recognize that electronic monitoring is another form of incarceration, that we don't need to spend money on e-carceration. We need to spend money on things that help develop communities, and instead of converting jails and instead of converting homes and communities into jail cells. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for all of your work and also really helping to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the devil, however he might come out disguised, he or she. I'd like to introduce our next panelist is Yakov Delaney. Yakov Delaney is the policy coordinator for the Lieutenant Governor's Office. Welcome, Yakov.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this event. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Thank you all. Okay, thanks. Thank you to all the speakers who've shared their powerful testimonies as well. Yes, I'm a policy coordinator for the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Stratton. And Lieutenant Governor has a saying that you can't have justice without equity and opportunities. And so with that, I just want to share a piece of what brings me into this space. I grew up in a public housing project on the southwest side of Chicago. I witnessed and experienced the lack of equitable resources and opportunities on a daily basis in my community, and seeing how the war on drugs and mass incarceration negatively impacted my family and community. I'm a former child of an incarcerated parent. At 7 years old, my father went to prison after returning home with a heroin addiction from serving in the U.S. Army and leaving my mother to raise three young boys on her own. By the time I was 14 years of age, I had joined a gang and had begun selling and using drugs. At 18 years of age, I became a victim of gun violence. And then the following year, at 19 years of age, I was the perpetrator of a violent offense and subsequently sentenced to a 45-year prison sentence. And as Eric referred to earlier, a de facto life sentence. It was during those years of having to survive within that 6x9 foot cell, at times alongside another human being, that I began to transform my thinking and my life. I was a prisoner law clerk for approximately 14 years within the Illinois Department of Correction. So I've seen firsthand how many incarcerated men completed educational, vocational courses and other programs in order to prepare for their successful reentry. Some of those same men would eventually return to prison months later, mainly because of the lack of housing and employment opportunities for people with criminal records. It was after having some conversations with these men who had been returning back that I determined that I would utilize my voice, my skills, and my experience to remove the barriers that systemically prevent people with records from becoming productive citizens. When I was released from prison after serving 22 and a half years, it was through family support that provided a safe landing for me. But also it was an equitable opportunity was presented to work at a legal organization that is still at the forefront of criminal justice reform work in the state of Ohio. So as we talk about the needs of people returning to society from our prison, let us remember first and foremost, these are human beings with value and worth. People who have experienced the prison system are human beings who have disparately been deprived of equity and opportunities before they even enter the prison system. These are people who have experienced dehumanization before going to prison and often inside of the prison facilities. Most people returning to society will need basic necessities to succeed in the next phase of their life after prison, such as supportive housing, medical care, state IDs, clothing, food assistance, financial assistance, family and community support, mental and emotional support. I think most of us know these things already, but what I like to say in closing is that one of the most essential needs for a person returning from prison is to be treated as a human being who's deserving of equitable opportunities to thrive as a productive citizen in this society. As a community and society, I feel it's our duty to ensure this need is supplied to every person in prison. Then it no longer becomes an issue as to who deserves to receive basic necessities. It's a common sense approach to address public safety and recidivism. It's through equity and opportunity I'm able to speak on this panel today, and on behalf of the office of this state's first African-American Lieutenant Governor, I feel that speaks volumes to the mission of this office to ensure that communities that have been ignored know they have a seat at the table. And in closing, I want to remind people about the R3 program, Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program, which invests 25% of net revenues from the legalization of marijuana legislation in communities that were most impacted by mass incarceration and the war on drugs. The notice of funding opportunity became available on May 18th, and I encourage you to log on to our website at r3.illinois.gov, where you can find more information and determine if your organization or the residents you serve are based in the designated eligible R3 zone to apply for this grant funding. Once again, I thank you for having me to be a part of this. Just hearing the voices of those that are currently incarcerated speaks volumes. I often communicate with men that are still incarcerated just to hear their perspective on what's happening on the inside and to bring their voices into these spaces that I work in. So once again, thank you for having me. Appreciate being a part of this.
Thank you, Jaco. Thank you for sharing your personal journey and what a healthy society can and should look like, and some of the resources available to folks. I'd now like to invite Michael Moore and Lori Jo Reynolds. I believe Michael is joining us by phone. Michael Moore is a barber, tattoo artist, father, and advocate with the Chicago 400. And Lori Jo Reynolds of the Chicago 400 Alliance is a policy advocate working to challenge the demonization, warehousing, and social exclusion of people in the criminal legal system.
Hi, everyone. I'll start. We're here to discuss the acute crisis caused by residency restrictions, discredited policies that permanently exclude people with past convictions, disproportionately Black men, from most housing for life. By barring people from nearly all housing, we force hundreds of Chicagoans into homelessness, 80% are Black men, and keep 1,200 people in prison past their release dates. Because you can't be paroled if you're banished from all housing. And we're forcing this on people who have homes to go to. Our laws make their housing options a crime, a felony. Worse yet, along with conviction registries, these laws require people to maintain ongoing adversarial police contact for their entire lives. If you're homeless, you have to register weekly at police. So Zakia is here and Michael is here from the Chicago 400 and Larry and probably others. They're the group of men and women who are homeless and must register weekly and are courageously standing up for themselves and asking for your support in revising these brutal and senseless policies. And Michael was also, 10 years ago, one of the people stuck in IDOC, as 1,200 people are now. So Michael? Michael is in his car and has been having a rough day, and I think
Are we able to unmute the telephone?
he was on a moment ago, and I think his number might have disappeared. Tim is helping. Zakia, are you on right now?
Yes, ma'am, I am. I'm here. I apologize. I was trying to unmute.
Oh no, you're amazing. I know Michael's been on and off, but since he's not on right now, and you're awesome. Do you want to say something?
You know, the thing is, hello to everyone, and I appreciate everyone in times such as these, times period, but especially times like this, even taking the time out of their day to hear from people who are in situations as like mine and similar. The thing about housing banishment, which makes it so hard, which perpetuates homelessness for people with past convictions, is that even when you think about things like the pandemic and the riots and everything going on in the street right now, that there are people who actually have a home that they could be in, be it on their own, in their own name, or with a family, or with friends. But if the police deem that this isn't a good address because it's within a certain footage of somewhere they say you shouldn't be, then you can't be there. And there are a lot of people. I'll even give you a snippet of my story. Like, you know, they have people take pleas, and unbeknownst to us, we don't know. I've never in my life experienced anything within the legal system. So, you know, they have people take pleas, you know, and most of the time it's people who are poor, who cannot afford proper legal representation. And you're oblivious to what comes along with these things, and then you find out. You know, I was living in a home that was safe and was fine, and I do have a minor child still. And you're told, hey, this isn't a good address, and they give you literally 1 hour, not a day, not a week, not 30, 1 hour to find suitable housing, which realistically is not really that possible. And I go from having a place to live to being homeless because they say you can't reside in a certain place. And it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And it's really, really hard when you think about, like, in a pandemic right now, you have people, like I say, it's one thing if you can't afford to live somewhere. It's another thing when you can afford to live somewhere, but they won't allow you to live somewhere. And it's just really hard. And you have, like I say, you have good people who could live somewhere having to ride on public transportation, ride trains during the night, and it's hard. There's only one shelter that I'm aware of, and shelters aren't even taking people right now, and having to sleep in our cars. And it's just really, really, really hard. And it's all because of something as simple as housing banishment. When we've served whatever state says our sentence should be, we serve that, yet we get out and we're still serving time because we can't live anywhere.
Thank you so much, Zakia, for stepping in like that. Thank you, Lori Jo, and thank you to Michael, wherever you is, for trying to be on with us when you're going through so much. We know, appreciate all the work that you are doing and really exposing all the barriers, some that we don't often see, that are really important to know and to fight for, or to fight against in this case. We're almost at the end, so thanks for sticking with us. We've got 2 more panelists who will be sharing some powerful words. So if you can stay with us, if you need to get up and get comfortable, that's all right. I want to take this moment to introduce Raul Dorado. Raul Dorado is a published author of poetry, essays, and news articles, and I will pass it over to Raul.
I believe Raul's statement will be read by Meli Rios.
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. I missed that one.
Okay. Hello all. First of all, I'm very honored to be speaking on behalf of Raul today. Here are Raul's words. Prisons are long-term care facilities, but without the actual care. Just over 4 decades ago, Illinois fell in line behind a national trend to abandon the goal rehabilitation in favor for punitive sentencing practices that are now the foundation for overcrowded prisons and an elderly prison population who bore the brunt of COVID-19. Be the message was clear. Despite your best efforts, you cannot earn early release. This message was reinforced with harsh sentencing laws designed to lock us in. Life without parole, a 3-strike law, mandatory minimum various sentence enhancements, and Truth in Sentencing Act. Laws that by itself doubted the amount of time that people had to serve in prison. Hawkish politicians leveraged this as an opportunity. Even as crime rates were decreasing, they fanned the flame of fear and sold the public on truth in sentencing, while simultaneously catapulting themselves into office with tough on crime propaganda. Illinois. Taxpayers were stuck with a bill and people of color were crammed into cells. When COVID-19 broke out in Stateville, prison administrators and medical staff failed to respond adequately, and 20 of our friends and neighbors lost their lives. Administrators underestimated the danger, failed to create space to isolate individuals, failed to acquire and provide PPE and other medical supplies, and failed to provide us with basic hygiene and sanitation products. When our friends felt unresponsive, we had to yell at the top of our lungs to help. Our neighbors were carried out on stretchers and just a few hours later were returned back to their cells, barely able to walk. Our friends were like fish out of water, gasping for air, and some died the very next day. It took someone to die for medical examiners to finally start sending people out to the ER. By now, everyone has heard the statistics recited about the racial disparities of who we incarcerate. But people on the outside are less acquainted with the people actually serving extreme sentences and with the individuals who died in IDOC's custody of COVID-19 and accomplice indifference. That's how dehumanization works. Dehumanization works. Denying us in the full portion of our humanity allows those in power themselves from the fact that a real person just died. They can bulldoze an amount of dirt over us and bury us alive in these massive tombs. But know that allowing someone to die is subject to the same moral appraisal as killing someone. To some degree, we are all broken like the glass on a storefront window, and the best years of our lives have been looted. Those who continuously dehumanize us could only identify the sharp edges of brokenness. Most lawmakers responsible for plundering the supply of Black and brown youths from our communities are no longer in office. And while many of our current legislators are willing to acknowledge the harms of mass incarceration, most are unwilling to expand the political capital to return us to our communities and reunite us with our loved ones. Not only do they fear being smeared as soft on crime, but they also fear political reprisals from the prison guards union that profits from imprisonment. Pinned under the knee of this injustice, we feel the weight of indifferences bearing down on us. We collectively suffer from the trauma and asphyxiation, and we can't breathe. There is no safety from moral appraisal on the sidelines. You either help or let us die. I want to end with 2 more things. SB 3233, Earned Discretionary Relief, would address the needs of every category of incarcerated people. Any EDR legislation must be retroactive to include the people who for decades have shouldered the burden of mass incarceration. Secondly, I would like to give credit where credit is due and praise Governor J.B. Pritzker for courageously exercising his power of executive clemency to grant sentence commutation. I also thank the legislators who are here today to listen. Thank you all. Raul.
Thank you, Melly. Thank you for your passion and for your advocacy with Parole Illinois and for being the voice of Raul today. We just got word that Representative LaShawn Ford is with us, and so if we'd like to go ahead and give Representative Ford the floor. He is the 8th Legislative District of Chicago on the west side of Chicago and works tirelessly to support people in prisons and formerly incarcerated and convicted people in securing civil and economic rights. Thank you for joining us, Representative Ford. I think we are just trying to find him. There's, I think, over 200 of us here on the Zoom meeting. So I think we're just trying to locate where he is so we can unmute him.
Okay. All right. Am I unmuted?
You're good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I will like to just thank you all for allowing me to come in late to hear some of your testimonies, and I'm in full support of your agenda. I know the agenda, and it doesn't change because things don't change, and that the things are the laws that we need to change. It's slow, and we have some progress, but we don't have enough. So I'm going to stay in the fight with this coalition and all the coalitions that's fighting for justice and fairness for all. And I appreciate you guys keeping this discussion today, because what happens in the world we live in, things happen and other things get pushed to the side and forgot about, because it seemed as though we can only deal with one thing at a time. And we're grateful for the life of George Floyd, and it has caused a lot of harm to our hearts and our souls and our communities. So I just commend you all for keeping to the mission and not letting this population be forgotten.
Thank you, Representative Ford. We appreciate you. We know how busy it's been. And yes, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. And so we still have a long ways to go, but we appreciate your leadership. With that said,
thank you.
Thank you. With that said, we want to go ahead and thank you all for staying with us and for joining us. And before we open it up to the press for any questions, I want to especially thank the individuals who participated by sharing your journey. Your powerful statements are a testimony to what a healthy society can and should look like, and the requirements needed to make fundamental changes to our justice system. To that end, I'd like to reiterate our demands, which include the following. First, we demand that the state take immediate steps to release all vulnerable people and individuals who are ready to return home from IDOC. We demand that the state take immediate steps to institute in all IDOC facilities social distancing yard time, access to the law library, and access to personal property, as well as better preparations for the next surge, the next pandemic. We firmly demand that Illinois prisons shift their focus from warehousing people to preparing individuals for safe return to their communities. We demand that the plethora of overly punitive laws passed over the 4 decades must be repealed, and that any new laws must be applied retroactively to people currently incarcerated, and the IDOC must prioritize programming and preparations for reentry. Finally, we demand fair and inclusive mechanisms to review and release people when they are ready to rejoin society by passing Illinois Senate Bill 3233, Earned Discretionary Release. With that, I'd also like to bring you all up to speed on ways that you can get involved and take action. First and foremost, please join the thousands of others who have already signed on the petition in support of SB 3233. We can go ahead and put the link for that in the chat box. It's change.org/parole Illinois. Next, for those interested and or in need of information on how to file an emergency clemency petition, please join Parole Illinois' upcoming training scheduled on June 13th at 3 p.m. And if you follow Parole Illinois on social media, you can get additional information on how to register for the training. For those interested in becoming more involved or learning more about Parole Illinois, you can join their next public meeting scheduled on June 28th at 2 p.m. Again, please sign up for their newsletter, check out their website for updates. And finally, follow our co-hosts at Shy Torture and friends at Black Lives Matter for actions around the uprising. And now, if there are any questions from the press, we will accept those. I'm not seeing any questions. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up our program. And thank you all again for participating, and thank you for all of our speakers for your strength and for your courage and for all the work that you're doing. Thank you, everyone.